All right, guys, so we got some updates here on the House GOP officially passing their first round of this budget bill that essentially is a massive tax cut for the wealthy while slashing social programs for the poor. And we also got some updates that we're going to get to on the outright fraud that Elon Musk's DOGE is conducting on the American people. So to start off here from Jake Sherman, the House GOP budget resolution has passed by a vote of 217 to 215. Basically, 0 Democrats voted in favor of it, and every single Republican voted in favor of it outside of Thomas Massie, who basically didn't like the fact that this bill is going to absolutely explode the debt and the deficit, which is something that Republicans love to pretend to care about when it comes to blocking any sort of investments in average Americans. And it's going to do that to give a, again, massive tax cut to the wealthiest people in the country. So we also had Trump weighing in here. He says this is a big first step win for Speaker Mike Johnson and America. Now let's start to balance the budget. It can be done. So, I mean, there's nothing farther from the truth in terms of analyzing this budget than to say that it's balancing the budget. It's not doing that in any way, shape, or form. But we continue just to give a perspective here on what exactly the goals of this bill are. You can see it basically here in this graph. If you are of the poorest 20%, or the second 20%, or the middle 20%, or the fourth 20%, or the next 15, in other words, the bottom 95% in this country, anybody making less than $360,000 per year, then this budget bill is going to lead to you paying more in taxes. So Republicans are going to try to frame it as a massive tax cut for the American people, when in reality, as you can see here, it's a massive tax cut for people making $360,000 or more, right? In fact, the biggest benefit comes from the top 5%. So this is what this bill is actually about. At the same time as they're slashing programs like Medicaid and SNAP that are supposed to be helping out the poorest people in the country, the people on the lowest end of this bracket. So if you're somebody who is an average working class American, let's say you're making less than $55,000 a year, you are going to have to pay more in taxes and are also going to be subjected to more onerous restrictions when it comes to programs like SNAP and Medicaid. Now, we also have this post here from Kasim, who says that MAGA is cutting Medicaid, which 60 million Americans rely on to survive, SNAP, which 40 million Americans rely on to eat school lunch, which 30 million Americans rely on daily, and housing assistance, which 5 million Americans rely on to live, all to cut $4.5 trillion in taxes for 800 billionaires. And as he points out there, this is barbaric. Now, we also had AOC, who weighed in here in this committee hearing on the absurdity of how they're approaching trying to slash Medicaid into a million pieces. So let's go ahead and watch a little bit of this clip here.
There's a fundamental math problem here. There is a constant reiteration of waste, fraud, and abuse. Sure, that's great. What is the identified amount of waste that this committee has identified? Because what the order that's been sent down here is find $880 billion. Not there is $880 billion of waste, fraud, and abuse. It's fined $880 billion. And so we have not heard a single concrete number of the amount of waste that's been identified. We have not heard a single concrete number on the amount of abuse that's been identified. And there's just kind of this vague magic wand around waste, to my colleague from California's point. And waste is being used as a very large word here, because what's being suggested is that long-term care is wasteful in America, that children's health insurance is wasteful in America, that poor people seeing the doctor is a waste, that all of these people are disposable, that the elderly are disposable. So I think the problem here is that the numbers don't add up. The numbers don't add up. $880 billion is a devastating cut to Medicaid, and given that 30% of Medicaid dollars also go to Medicare, it's also an attack on Medicare, to Medicare recipients. And so while I completely understand the idea that there should not be waste, that there should not be fraud, and that there should not be abuse, $880 billion is not that. This is an attack on Medicaid, and anyone who votes on this budget this week is voting to cut Medicaid in America and voting to gut healthcare for Medicare recipients in America. There's just no other way around.
Yeah, I mean, she's 100% correct. And what she just said there at the end applies apparently to 100% outside of Thomas Massie Republicans in the House of Representatives. This is obviously an attack on Medicaid and Medicare programs that Republicans would love to throw out the window if they could entirely. And what she was saying there at the beginning, in terms of the allegations of waste, fraud, and abuse from Elon Musk and DOGE and Trump and other Republicans as well, she's getting to the point there, which is that the way that they structured this bill isn't just to say, let's cut $880 billion. It's to say, like, go and find waste, fraud, and abuse worth $880 billion that exists within Medicaid. Now, the problem, as she's pointing out there, is that there isn't $880 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid. And this is the lie that Trump and Elon are trying to sell to the American people. Trump was on with Sean Hannity recently, just a few days ago, and he was directly asked, are you going to cut Medicaid? And he said, no, I'm only going to go after the fraud, right? And so this is the lie that they're trying to perpetrate, that there's somehow $880 billion in fraud that's existing within Medicaid, right? That there's billions and billions of dollars in the lie that we covered a couple of days ago from Elon Musk that exists within Social Security. So they're going to slash these programs into a million pieces under the lie that they're just going after waste, fraud, and abuse. And keep in mind what they're actually doing through this whole DOGE program. We'll get to more of this here in a second. They're not finding waste, fraud, and abuse. They're just finding funding mechanisms that were passed by Congress, that were signed into law, that they have no legal or constitutional authority to do anything with. And they're just programs that they politically or ideologically disagree with. And they're freezing the spending on that and then claiming that it's waste and fraud. That's not what this is. You guys are just attacking the federal government to make it incapacitated, incapable of going after billionaires and corporations that are ripping off average Americans. And you're slashing social programs for the poor so that you can save a little bit of money to offset just a little bit of the trillions of dollars in tax cuts that you're trying to give to the richest people in this country. That's what this is, right? If you are an average working class Republican or a Trump supporter, you have to understand at this point that you are being lied to. You are being scammed by the most obvious con artists in history. As AOC is pointing out there, the math is not mathing, okay? It's not adding up. Now, we also have just amazing posts like this, because if you guys remember, Trump ran during the campaign on like, oh, we're going to get rid of tax on tips for like, you know, somebody who's like a bartender, for example, or a waitress. We're going to get rid of tax on overtime, tax relief for seniors, tax break for products manufactured in the U.S., balanced budget resolution, meaning that it's deficit neutral. And she's bragging about this. She's saying, we are passing reconciliation, to highlight a few things. Literally not a single thing that she listed here is actually what's in this budget. None of these things are true, right? There is no, removal of tax on tips or tax on overtime or tax relief for seniors. It's just a fucking lie. So they're just lying about it at the same time as they're doing all of this. Now, moving on to a little bit more of the DOGE aspect. We have Elon Musk, apparently our like CEO dictator in chief here, who took over a cabinet meeting in the Trump White House. You can see Elon standing up here over everybody as Trump sort of like is humiliatingly like sitting in the corner here looking like a child who's just been scolded for like stealing a cookie or something. So Elon's running the meeting and he makes what he thinks, I guess, is like a brag statement here, but it's just utterly humiliating. So let's go ahead and watch this clip.
I should say, we will make mistakes. We won't be perfect. But when we make a mistake, we'll fix it very quickly. So, for example, with USAID, one of the things we accidentally canceled very briefly was Ebola prevention. I think we all want Ebola prevention. So we restored the Ebola prevention immediately, and there was no interruption. But we do need to move quickly if we're to achieve a $1 trillion deficit reduction in financial year 2026. It requires saving $4 billion per day, every day, from now through the end of September. But we can do it, and we will do it.
Okay, number of different things on that. First off, the numbers that he's throwing out there at the end, we're going to have to save $4 billion per day from now until September, I think he said. Guys, we just covered the story a few days ago of Doge putting out this statement. They claimed we just saved $55 billion. Isn't this amazing? Then you look into it a little bit deeper and you add up the line items of the things that they're claiming that they saved by canceling all of these contracts and freezing all of the spending. And then it actually ends up adding up to like $16 billion. Then you look a little bit deeper beyond that and you realize, hey, the biggest item within these so-called savings is an $8 billion contract that was actually worth $8 million, right? So shave another 8 off, and then we're left with like roughly around $8 billion in savings that they have come up with. Now think about the chaos, the amount of destruction that they have already levied to this country in terms of disabling the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, that has saved billions of dollars for the American people who have been scammed and defrauded by financial institutions, essentially destroying the National Labor Relations Board so that companies can illegally union bust with complete and total impunity. The amount of destruction, the thousands of people that they have laid off over just the last month and a bit here, and they've only managed to save like $8 billion according to their own numbers that they published. So what, we're approaching less than 1% of the Pentagon budget? And moving on, I mean, on top of that, he brings up this specific example here in this video of like a oopsie-daisies, we accidentally, as our like slash and burn strategy was pushing forward, we cut funding to Ebola prevention. And he brings this up again as sort of like a brag to be like, yeah, we're going to make mistakes, but then we're going to correct those mistakes. Like he thinks he's making a point here. He thinks that this makes him look competent when it does the complete opposite of that. Listen, guys, like just in a broad scopes way, like if you are going to approach waste, fraud, and abuse, there's plenty of that exists within the government. Number one, maybe look at Elon Musk contracts. We'll get to more of that here in a second. Tens of billions of dollars that we have handed to this man to prop up his companies. But you could look at the Pentagon. You could even look at programs like Medicaid, like Medicare Advantage, or whatever the case may be, that do have some element of actual fraud, right? Where companies or where, individuals are submitting claims, and I'm not talking about people who are Medicare and Medicaid recipients, but like the doctors or the hospitals that submit some of these claims that are actually fraudulent. They're not providing the care that they're claiming that they are, and then they're getting paid on the back end. There is some element of waste, of fraud, and abuse that exists in these systems. But you would have to go in and do like a detailed analysis of where that fraud is being committed. You could even bring criminal charges for people who are committing that fraud. And you could go about it in a detailed and a reasonable way and actually save a little bit of money and improve the programs and make them more sustainable, right? That's one way you could go about doing it. Or you could take the Elon Musk and the Trump and the Republican strategy, which is just burn everything to the ground, make it so that these programs don't work anymore or are incredibly difficult to access, to further undercut trust in government institutions, trust in these kinds of programs, so that you can just toss off all power, all authority, all control within this country to a handful of oligarchs, right? Privatize everything, deregulate everything, make sure that there's no accountability mechanisms that are in place for the wealthiest people in human history, like Elon Musk. That's the strategy that they're actually going with. They're not going to address waste, fraud, and abuse, okay? Now, to follow up specifically on the Ebola side of this, we had a response here from somebody who actually worked at USAID in Ebola outbreak prevention. He says, this is bunk from Elon. They have laid off most of the experts. They're bankrupting most of the partner organizations, have withdrawn from the World Health Organization, and muzzled the CDC. What's left is a fig leaf effort to cover their asses politically. So even on this Ebola front, he's just wrong. Like they didn't, they didn't just not disrupt the program and oops, we caught our mistake and then we fixed it and no problems. That's not even the case. Now, we also have some further admissions here from Doge in terms of how little they've actually been saving. So here we have from Kyle Griffin, Doge quietly deleted the 5 biggest spending cuts that it celebrated last week. An $8 billion cut at ICE was actually $8 million, again, the one I just mentioned. 3 $655 million cuts to USAID were actually a single cut erroneously counted 3 times. We're supposed to believe these guys are competent, right? A $232 million cut at the Social Security Administration was actually $565,000. So, I mean, again, this whole process, another point here, from the AP, nearly 40% of the contracts that were canceled by Musk's Doge are expected to produce no savings. Because essentially what they're doing is they're looking at programs or contracts that in some instances it's like, oh, this is a 5-year contract or a 10-year contract, and it'll be worth X amount of billions of dollars that are going to be paid out. And they're finding, let's say, a contract for $10 billion, where, $9 billion of the $10 billion has already been paid out. And then they cut that contract and say, we just saved $10 billion. No, you didn't. You just saved $1 billion, maybe. And so repeating this over and over and over again, almost half of the contracts that have been canceled are not even saving any money. So the entire process has either been them completely making up bullshit, like the $50 million, $100 million in condoms to Hamas to fund bombs that they're making in Gaza, apparently. So it's either completely made up, or it's drastically exaggerated, or it's just straight up fraudulent, where they're changing the numbers in order to try to manipulate it into a way where they're saving more money than they actually are. I mean, the cost benefit here of the amount that they're saving versus the destruction that they're doing, it's not even close. Now, on top of that, we also had here from Ryan Grimm, kind of an astonishing story. Now, I'm just going to paraphrase my understanding of this. I talked about this with him today. So my understanding is that a few days ago, Dropsite News and Ryan, they uncovered that one of the top contracts from, I believe, the State Department was going towards purchasing electric vehicles, specifically armored Cybertrucks from Tesla. They were going to spend $400 million on this. Now, the claim at the time was like, oh, well, this had initially happened under the Biden administration, and so this wasn't us. He looked a little bit more into it, right? And it turns out that under Biden, they were prepared to spend a few $100,000 on Teslas for the State Department. The Trump administration, obviously led by Elon Musk, then altered that contract to be $400 million. Then they backdated the records to make it look like this was a $400 million contract that was done under the Biden administration. The State Department then canceled the contract after Dropsite News exposed it. So, as Ryan says here, I mean, Dropsite News, by exposing this contract and exposing the fact that they lied about it and tried to cover it up and are trying to change the backdating on it, they actually saved us more money than Elon Musk has, right? They're actually doing, with this reporting, more savings for the American people than Elon Musk is actually doing. I mean, this is just insane. This is, I don't understand how this isn't just outright illegal, prosecutable fraud here. You had a contract that was worth 400-something thousand under the Biden administration for electric vehicles. Trump comes into office. Elon Musk takes over. They change that contract to be worth multiple times more, from 400,000 to 400 million, to give a handout to Elon and Tesla. Then they try to change the date on it to make it look like it was done before he took office. I mean, this shit is just straight up criminal. They are robbing you. Now, thankfully, this contract was canceled because they exposed it. But I mean, Jesus Christ, guys. We also had here from Crystal, new Washington Post report revealing how Elon begged for government subsidies to keep his companies alive. So let's go ahead and watch this little TikTok that she did.
Elon Musk is the biggest welfare queen to have ever existed in the history of the world, and we now have the receipts to prove it. So just to his companies, Tesla and SpaceX, he has gotten at least $38 billion in federal government contracts. That's our taxpayer money going straight into Elon Musk's pockets. And what's more, Tesla and SpaceX, without our funding, would probably not even exist today. First, let's talk about Tesla.
Just as a quick reference point for how much money that is, $38 billion, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that Elon Musk essentially had deleted, that again safeguards Americans from being defrauded and scammed by big financial institutions, their annual budget is less than $1 billion. Just for perspective, in terms of how much money we're talking about here.
Tesla was struggling. It was about to go under when Elon came hat in hand to the government and begged for a massive energy department loan to the tune of $465 million to keep that company afloat. That allowed them to build the Model S, allowed them to buy their factory in Fremont, California, and allowed that company to really take off and fight another day. In addition, over the years, a third of Tesla's revenue has come from federal and state subsidies. They sell these tax credits. So, for example, in the state of California, where Tesla was based until recently, they have certain standards that automakers have to meet. And since Tesla is zero emissions because it's an electric vehicle, they can sell those credits to other automakers. And so they made a tremendous amount of money doing exactly that. Those credits are actually what allowed Tesla to become profitable in the very first year that they were able to turn a profit. And then there's SpaceX, which, if anything, is even more dependent on government money. A majority of SpaceX revenue comes from the Defense Department and NASA. That is where the money for SpaceX comes from. And oh, by the way, we, the US federal government, the taxpayers, apparently, since we're on the hook for it, have looked the other way as SpaceX missed milestone after milestone. That's according to congressional investigators who said the subsidies and the funding kept coming, even though SpaceX routinely failed to deliver. All this led Jeff Bezos to say, Elon's real superpower is getting government money. And that is certainly the case. So now that he is in control of the federal government, he wants to completely plunder the treasury. He wants to use the federal government to completely backstop his entire net worth. And not only that, he wants to use it to crush his competitors, and he wants to slash the parts of the government that actually benefit regular people, things like Social Security and Medicare and veterans benefits and Medicaid. Those pieces he wants to go away so that there's more money for him and for his companies.
So she's 100% correct. I mean, listen, that's a basic fact there. Elon Musk's companies that have made him the single richest human being in history would not exist if it wasn't for federal government subsidies bailing him out when his companies were about to go under. For SpaceX, it's a majority, as she was pointing out there. Now, at the same time, as she's saying, he's trying to go after programs that are designated to assist the poorest people in the country. This is a full-blown open oligarch takeover of the government. Like, I need people to understand the gravity of what's happening now. Okay? We've had corruption. We've had pay for play, right? We've had campaign finance issues that have led to deep rot and corruption within both the Democratic and the Republican parties. This is how U.S. politics works. It's a system of legalized corruption and bribery. We all understand that. But this is taking it to like such an egregious level that they've just completely ripped the mask off. They're not even pretending like it's a democracy anymore. Elon Musk gave almost $300 million to the Trump administration to get him elected. So he helps to install the president, and that's crumbs, by the way. Because keep in mind, $300 million to Trump, at the same time as since Trump took office or since Trump won the election, he's made tens of billions of dollars, right, from his position. So that's crumbs to him. He can buy off a president, get himself to be in the most influential position in the government, continue to receive government subsidies to the tune of hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, and also slash social programs for the poor, to cut unilaterally, unconstitutionally, illegally, all of this congressionally authorized spending. This is a full-blown open oligarch takeover of the US government. They're not even doing the pretend game anymore. And it isn't just Elon Musk, it's also the rest of the Trump administration, by the way. Go look at who he's appointing for like the USDA, some seed lobbyist, right? Everybody in the Trump administration, whether it's the EPA, whether it's the USDA, whether it's the Department of Education, whether it's the CFPB, every single one of these agencies has been stacked by either a billionaire, a lobbyist, a donor, somebody who has a direct conflict of interest within these agencies. This is the Trump administration. They represent elites and elite interests more than any president in the history of this country. And that's saying a lot, because most presidents act in service of the wealthy, act in service of what's in the best interest of the billionaire class, of corporate interests. But this is taking it to an entirely different level. We're installing them directly into the government now. So to finish off the video here, a couple more things. We also have here from Caroline Leavitt, Trump's spokeswoman in the White House, who is, and this is part of this legal game that they're playing right now, refusing to admit that Elon Musk is in charge of Doge. So because the Trump administration has realized that what Elon's doing in his capacity as the head of Doge is illegal and unconstitutional, they're now saying, no, he's actually not in charge of Doge. I mean, she was directly asked about this. Who is the Doge administrator? And she says, I'm not going to reveal the name of that individual from this podium. What the fuck does that mean? What do you mean you're not going to reveal the name of the most influential agency in the federal government right now? What do you mean by that? It's a secret? You can't tell us? Oh, because it's Elon Musk, right? And we all fucking know that. And we're not stupid. This is how stupid they think you are. Oh, I don't know who's in charge of DOGE. Some unidentified person, right? And again, they're doing this because in a part of their legal battles to do all of this spending freeze, they know that it's illegal for Elon Musk to be unilaterally doing this. So now they're just saying, no, Elon's actually not running DOGE. Okay, but he's doing cabinet meetings in the fucking White House as Trump sits in a corner. All right. Now, we also have here just as a reminder in terms of the polling and how this might spectacularly backfire on Trump and Elon, departments that should be eliminated. Number one answer, 29% is DOGE. Then you have Housing and Urban Development, you have the NSF, the USPS, the Department of Energy, NASA, HHS, all of these down here. This is a YouGov poll from yesterday. 29%, by far and away, the number one answer of departments that should be eliminated is DOGE. Now, last thing here, we also have the continued, relentless unleashing at some of these Republican town halls. I won't play the clip because it's similar to ones that we've talked about before, but we had another Republican here, Representative Mark Alford, who was just getting absolutely harassed by his own constituents. I think one of them was working for the Veterans Affairs Agency, and one of them was working for the Social Security Administration, and he's just getting blasted over and over and over again. And this is more of what we need, I think, in order to try to apply pressure on them in one way, shape, or form. Now, it's difficult for them, honestly, these Republicans, because even if they do feel an immense amount of heat from their own voters, from their own constituents, you also have Elon Musk dangling the billions and billions of dollars that he has at his disposal towards the destruction of their political careers. So this is our political system here. We now have a full-blown open oligarchy that is in control of the U.S. federal government. We have a rotten campaign finance system where billionaires' corporate interests can just buy off our politicians over and over and over again. Again, goes for both parties, Republicans and Democrats. The Democratic pushback to all of this has just been absolutely pathetic and abysmal, at least from the leadership like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and the rest of these gerontocratic, Democratic leaders. And there's no end in sight at this point. Like, I wish I had some sort of like a rallying cry here. Like, this is the neat thing, the quick trick that you need to do in order to stop all of this, but I genuinely don't know what it is. We are just witnessing the fall of the U.S. empire. We are witnessing this country be shattered into a million pieces in real time. So, yeah, I'll keep you guys updated on it, I guess.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying